Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this. Today, we're doing a really fascinating, kind of clinical dissection of how human intelligence actually works. And look, we're not just talking about who gets straight A's and who doesn't. We're looking at the actual architecture of the mind. We're going to explore this whole cognitive spectrum, starting all the way down at that rigid, inflexible thinking and moving all the way up to the relentless, multidimensional processing of the highly gifted mind. So get ready to look at the people around you and, honestly, maybe even yourself in a totally different light.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll establish a baseline, looking at the cognitive spectrum and the signs of cognitive rigidity. Once we understand what happens when a mind literally refuses to bend, we'll jump into complex cognitive processing, the actual mechanics of the gifted mind, the pretty heavy weight of intense emotion that comes with it, and finally, what it actually means to embrace your unique frequency. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The Cognitive Spectrum, the Illusion of Knowledge versus True Depth.
Okay, to really appreciate the breathtaking speed of a highly gifted mind, we've got to set a baseline first. So let me ask you, have you ever met someone who argues with just absolute confidence but makes literally zero sense? You know the type. Maybe it was in a completely unhinged social media thread, or, I don't know, a chaotic holiday dinner. They're loud, they're dead certain, and they are absolutely, unequivocally wrong. It's incredibly frustrating, right? Well, psychology tells us this isn't just everyday arrogance. It's an actual, measurable cognitive deficit. The clinical term for this exact behavior is the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's this wild psychological phenomenon where individuals with lower cognitive ability massively overestimate their skills. And why does that happen? Because they literally don't know enough to realize how much they don't know. They're completely missing the awareness needed to even spot their own blind spots. So you get this supreme confidence, but right underneath all that volume, there is just a total absence of logic or complex understanding. Which brings us to Section 2, Signs of Cognitive Rigidity, or when the mind refuses to bend. This whole overconfidence without understanding thing doesn't just stop at silly arguments. It physically manifests in how the brain utterly fails to process complex information. On one side of the fence, you have black and white thinking. People with lower cognitive flexibility see the world in absolute extremes, like something is either 100% right or 100% wrong. Psychologists call this cognitive rigidity. They profoundly struggle with nuance or complexity, or holding two different ideas in their head at once. Now, on the flip side, you have intellectual curiosity. Intelligent minds inherently ask why. They actually want to understand the mechanics of things, and they embrace new ideas. Meanwhile, the rigid mind avoids those new ideas because, well, learning actually feels like a direct threat to their ego. And this rigidity totally spills over into everyday life. First off, you see constant blame, what psychology calls an external locus of control. Basically, they think life just happens to them, so nothing is ever their fault. Second, poor emotional control. They react totally impulsively and just can't regulate frustration. And third, they constantly confuse disagreement with disrespect. Because logical debate requires a cognitive effort they just can't quite muster, they take any opposing opinion as a deeply personal attack. Understanding the why behind this rigid behavior perfectly sets the stage for seeing just how differently the gifted mind actually operates. Section 3, Complex Cognitive Processing, the rare frequency. All right, let's make a sharp pivot to the total opposite end of the spectrum. Listen to this. You think in systems, not sentences. I want you to really let that sink in. Most people kind of see the world in straight lines, but the highly intelligent mind, it sees patterns, contradictions, and all these hidden connections all at the exact same time. It's like a giant invisible puzzle. And it's exactly why small talk feels so incredibly draining to these folks. Discussing the weather literally feels like cognitive starvation when your brain inherently craves depth and systemic understanding. Let's break down the specific psychological traits of this super rare frequency. First up, high interpersonal sensitivity. They're reading microbehaviors, tiny hesitations, and all the words left unsaid instantly. They spot manipulation miles before anyone else does. Next is self-transcendence. While everyone else is chasing status or applause, this type of mind is craving ultimate meaning and truth. And honestly, perhaps the most impressive trait is their cognitive control under stress. When emotions are running super high and the whole room is panicking, this rare mind naturally detaches. They just observe the chaos logically and calmly.
Moving on to Section 4, Mechanics of the Gifted Mind, and exactly why it never rests.
We're diving deep now into a psychological tier where brains aren't just functioning a little faster. They are fundamentally wired with a totally different architecture. And get this, psychology indicates that only an estimated 2% of the population operates with a specific, highly active, gifted mental framework. Just 2%. It is an incredibly exclusive cognitive bracket. So, how does it actually work in practice? It's called multidimensional thinking, and it happens in this crazy, rapid chain reaction. Step 1, they observe some invisible detail or pattern that the rest of the room completely walked past. Step 2, that single thought instantly splinters into 10 distinct connected ideas. It's just boom, boom, boom. Step 3, they endlessly question why to dig down to the foundational truth. They absolutely cannot stand shallow explanations. Their brain doesn't just process data, right? It excavates it.
Now, the stark reality of having that kind of mental architecture is that, well, the average mind is highly capable of just switching off. You sit on the couch, put on a show, and your brain relaxes. But the gifted mind? No way. It never stops. It is constantly running, analyzing, planning, imagining, questioning. Even when they actively try to chill out, their mind is just flooding with new ideas. It's a reality that is simultaneously exhilarating, deeply creative, and, let's be honest, profoundly exhausting. Which brings us right into Section 5, the weight of intense emotion, the cost of depth. You see, high-level cognitive processing doesn't exist in a vacuum. It comes heavily tethered to extreme emotional depth. There is a real cost to processing the world this deeply. Remember earlier when we talked about low cognitive emotionality, that tendency to react impulsively and throw tantrums? Well, compare that to gifted emotional attunement. Gifted minds feel happiness, sadness, and anger far more intensely than your average person. Their emotional world is so vivid it can be overwhelming. But here's the twist. They usually process these intense feelings completely internally and quietly. So to the outside world, they might seem super mysterious or detached, but inside, they're navigating an absolute ocean of complex emotion. And all that internal intensity breeds what we call gifted perfectionism, because they can clearly see the ultimate perfect potential of literally any project or situation. They push themselves to completely impossible standards. They are, without a doubt, their own worst, most brutal critics. Now, this perfectionism acts as a massive driver for their success, for sure, but it's also the primary cause of their endless exhaustion. When you see the entire world in these multidimensional layers, falling even a little bit short of your potential feels like a total failure. Section 6, embracing your unique frequency, the reality of the gift. So, what's the ultimate personal and social reality of walking around with this rare cognitive architecture? Clinically speaking, these folks are wired for authenticity, not adaptation, meaning they absolutely refuse to fake it just to fit in. And because of this, they often end up feeling like deeply misunderstood outsiders. They'd honestly rather choose isolation over playing some superficial, surface-level role in a group. Plus, they are guided by this hyper-self-awareness with a constant, unyielding inner dialogue. They don't just live life, they are constantly analyzing life as they're living it. Ultimately, the big takeaway you really need to understand here is this. Being gifted isn't about the grades you got in middle school or how well you perform on some standardized test. It is entirely about how deeply, intensely, and multidimensionally you see and interact with the reality around you. It's an incredible gift, but yeah, it's also a heavy weight to carry. So I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. If you've always felt a little different, maybe out of place or totally out of sync with the rigid, reactive world around you, are you simply strange? Or is your mind just wired for way more depth, more awareness, and more truth than most people can possibly handle? Think about exactly where you sit on that cognitive spectrum. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember, keep questioning everything.